Hi, good morning everyone, good afternoon everyone. I'm going to be talking about the Curator Project at the Grant Museum of Zoology, which is a project that the name only works if you say it out loud, but it's spelt Curator. Only works, if you read it. Claire and I are both going to be talking about the same project. Myself from the museum point of view, why we did it, what we wanted to get out of it, and what we offered, and Claire from the academic side of things. The project was eventually was submitted to REF, so she's going to be talking about the academic side of things. Excuse me for reading. I'm going to read because it's got to fit it into 10 minutes, and I don't want to tread on Claire's toes if I allow myself to wander. So Curator is a collaboration between academic departments at University Museum, which delivers to our visitors an innovative method of engagement, while at the same time operates as a research program for our academic partners who are essentially experimenting on those visitors. It's a collaboration between the Grant Museum, the UCL Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, and the UCL Centre for Digital Humanities, and it remains a leading model for user-generated content in the sector. So to begin, I'll just explain a bit about the museum and how its roles changed, which developed into this project over the recent years. And since our founding in the 1820s, the museum's collection was vital to the teaching of life sciences at UCL, as well as a research repository for academics. But it was only open to the public in 1997, and it wasn't until 2004 that learning programs were first established to encourage engagement with the museum for schools, the public, and families, as well as develop better links with the higher education sector. And since that program started in 2004, we saw a tenfold increase in the number of users to the museum following that development, and in 2011 we managed to argue for a much larger space as a major gateway for the university to engage with the public. So the museum moved in 2011, and it looks like this, still quite small. We obviously saw that as a major opportunity to take a step back and consider what we do and what we can do. However, all of the visitor feedback we got urged us not to change at all in terms of the atmosphere and the style of the old museum when we were building the new one, which is obviously a bit of a challenge. And the challenge was, how do we build a 21st century museum without detracting from our popular historic atmosphere? So at UCL Museums, it's crucial to important that everything we do is for the university, and it's our primary audience, and that has to be reflected in everything from working with schools to exhibitions. And as with everyone else, I'm sure here, the most interesting way we do support UCL is taking a big role in fulfilling our academic colleagues' impact agenda. They need to have a public to have impact on, and we have the public that we can deliver to them as a museum. And for me, the best thing about working in university museums is that we're surrounded by 10, 20,000 minds with ideas who have fantastic expertise and knowledge that we're really well placed to tap into. And at the same time, we can be part of their research, and they can deliver services through that research to our audiences. And the Curator Project was basically modelled on that concept of both parties having something the other party needed in terms of knowledge and interests to fulfil our respective goals. So to return to the move of the museum in 2011, our challenge was to take the opportunity to bring the museum in the 21st century whilst not upsetting our visitors, who we were sure would resent the introduction of technology just for the sake of it. And we wanted to experiment with new models of interpretation and participation, and to add the visitor voice to the museum. UCL Museum is really placing itself, or wants to place itself as an area of experimentation and innovation to take on risky ideas and see what happens with them. And that's exactly what the Curator Collaboration does. The way Curator was developed started a long time ago with the UCL Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, which I'm going to call CASA from now on, and UCL Centre for Digital Humanities. And the researchers there were interested in developing smart labels with us, so electronic textual labels that could be switched between different modes, depending on the audience. And they were keen to work with us to develop computer interactives that could be tested in the museum. And the ideas developed like this. We began with experimenting with a program that CASA had developed called Tales of Things, which is a user-generated content program where any object in the world can have individuals' stories added to it. So it was been used in Selfridges, it's been used in Oxfam, where people leave the stories with the objects they're leaving. The conversation, we started by adding our specimens to that system. Then it moved on to the smart labels idea, where we thought, can we use digital technology to switch between modes when we've got a biology undergraduate class in compared to when we've got a themed family day on, just at a touch of a button, switch all of our interpretation. And then we combined the two ideas to create a visitor-generated smart label, which we wanted to allow different visitors to interact with each other through digital conversations. The problem is that natural history isn't very well suited to use generated content because unlike a lot of other disciplines, at the end of the day, that's a turtle, and there aren't many other interesting interpretations of that turtle. So one visitor can't say something very interesting to the next visitor about turtles. Potentially controversial thing to say. So it's always at the front of our mind that the act of participation alone isn't enough, and you have to be able to add something that's useful, first for the person leaving it, second for the person reading it, and also for the museum as well. So it's really important that anything else is basically just a one-player game. The solution was Curator. So Curator by embracing a philosophy of being a venue for experimental projects and innovation for the university, we have in Gallery a groundbreaking method of public engagement that was developed with dual goals. As I said, for us, a way for our visitors to contribute their opinions to how museums like ours should operate and their role of science in society today. And for our partners, the opportunity to run a live research program concerning how museum visitors engage with digital social interactives and how audiences behave around technology in museums. It's both a visitor engagement project and a research program, and has the potential to change the way the museum behaves, as well as elicit changes in visitor behaviour. So to these ends, we're only the second museum in the world to employ iPads permanently in displays, the first museum in the world to do it well. Instead of asking visitors to respond to individual objects like a turtle, which we considered likely to be uninteresting, we asked them to respond to questions which we wanted to know their thoughts. Questions like, should human and animal remains be treated differently in museums like ours? Should scientists shy away from studying differences between the races? And is it ever acceptable for museums to lie? Each question is linked to a case of specimens which expand on the issue. Visitors can respond on the iPads live themselves, on a custom app made by CASA, on their own smartphones by scanning the QR code, on Twitter, on home on their own computers, so that they can take the conversations with them once they've left the museum and continue contributing. The aims of the questions are to invite comments on issues that visitors can immediately get a response to without having any prior knowledge. And we're extremely, genuinely interested in what they have to say on the matters, as many of them can influence the way we operate, and in these ways the museum visitors have been empowered to engage in issues not normally open to them or ones that they haven't thought of before. And excluding a profanities filter, visitors can type whatever they like into a free text box and it goes live immediately on the iPad and online. It's obviously very risky in post-moderation only, and it does mean we have to keep an extra close eye on what's coming in. As you can imagine, what 11-year-old boys try to write in a free text box. But we've proved that visitors can be trusted with free text, and this is, as I think Claire will talk about, go on to influence how other museums have taken it on, and that we as a university museum are acting as a test bed. How much time have I got? Couple of minutes, fine. I'll talk about the risks of being in such a partnership. Obviously, partnership work is inherently risky, and hopefully Claire, as one of the partners, won't disagree with anything I have to say here. But we do have different agendas in the research and visitor engagement world, and whilst it's an experiment, the visitors don't know that it's an experiment. For if you're a visitor, it's just an interactive in the museum that they're coming along to do. And there's some ethical questions about that, which I won't go into now, but we can pick up again, whether people know they've been empowered and know they're being engaged with and know that they are being researched on. But at the end of the day, at some point, we're not in control of everything that happens. There's agendas that we have to meet on both sides. And there's technical issues. We never know if it's a risk. We don't know if it's going to be a success. So we've only planned for a short period of time, at which point we're going to take it out. However, it's been a massive success. It's really popular. And now we're wondering how we can sustain it, because as soon as we take it out, if we don't replace it, we'll just be a room of dead animals again. And that's not what we want to be. We want to be more than that. But to a very great extent, these challenges have been overcome and the project's been a demonstrable success. Firstly, the visitors like it. If you look at our TripAdvisor reviews, a lot of them mention these really interesting interactions. So many interesting conversations on the system itself. It's really, really working far better than we wanted it to. It was named by the New Media Consortium's Horizons report for museums and galleries as being 4 to 5 years ahead of the adoption horizon for the sector. So clearly demonstrating that it is innovating. And we were getting, it's 3 years old now, we were getting, and still are, kind of one museum a week around the world contacting us and saying, tell us about it, what have you learned, how do we do it? And it led on to work at the Imperial War Museum, I think Claire might talk about. It won the Museums and Heritage Award for Innovation, and we have basically wholesale put it into the Museum of Brands and Packaging, a partner in our Share Academy project at UCL, which is an independent museum in West London, who are just using it as it is. So we've got getting footfall there as well. I'm sure we'll talk more about it hopefully we'll talk more about it in the panel discussion, but I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I thought I would just talk because Jack's really shown you all the nice pictures. Basically, I'm going to talk about as it were, the academic side of the partnership. One of the things that is very important is that this really was a partnership. You know, as Jack has said, this came about, it's very much a multidisciplinary team. It involves different parts of UCL in terms of the academics involved, but it was also very important to us to work with museums. It's also important to state that this was not simply a kind of professional stroke academic faculty project, but it was also very, very important as the core of a PhD project for one of the most talented PhD students I've ever had the pleasure to supervise, called Claire Ross, who is about to be vivaed next week. And this, you know, a large amount of this was her initiative to be thinking about how might museums work with Internet of Things, work with digital humanities, work with user studies, and putting that idea of bringing these things together was very much hers, and then the rest of us kind of got together and started talking. So I think it's very important to see that this kind of initiative can come from all sorts of different parts of a university. Yes, it was entered for the ref in a case study that looked at digital interaction and crowdsourcing within a university context. So this was not only about Curator, but also the very well-known transcribed Bentham project, which is led by our laws department, and my colleague Melissa Terrace was very important in the development of the digital aspects of that. So the case study was on both, and really this idea of how do we encourage user participation through digital methods. Now, in the ref, the definition of impact migrated quite a lot from a very hard one, which was you must be able to approve changes in user behaviour and benefits in the kind of cultural heritage or indeed general well-being of the population, to you've really got to prove that someone notices it. Now, that wasn't exactly what they said in the HEFC documents, but in effect that's what happened. That was a much softer definition of impact, if you like, but I believe that we actually managed the harder one as well as the softer one. We got a very large amount of coverage, as Jack has said, in various different museums, reports and awards, but also a vast amount of coverage in the press. I mean, there's loads and loads of articles about Curator in various different types of press, and that was very important for our impact case study. But we can prove a change in behaviour in the sense that of course, the Grant Museum had a visitors book, but I would have thought maybe very few people used it. You know, tiny numbers of people actually use the visitors book. What we could see with Curator is around about a third of visitors made some kind of comment with Curator, which is massive. It means that a lot of visitors were actually interacting with the museum, so we can show a change in behaviour. We can't necessarily show that this change in behaviour was beneficial to our users, although a lot of what they were expressing was very positive and very enthusiastic. Nevertheless, I think, you know, this is pretty good impact, and of course its reach is massive, as Jack said. It's had global attention, and so in all the definitions of impact, we can prove it with this project, which is fantastic. This question of trust and that people really do want to interact with the museum was fascinating. You know, the amounts of spam comments were incredibly low. And it showed that people really do want to interact and will interact in a serious fashion with these questions. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of kids in the museum, so, you know, some of the levels of what they're saying are going to be different depending on, you know, the age of we presume the age of the recipient, the respondent. We didn't actually put in any kind of registration screen because we know that deters people from interacting. So we don't actually have the demographic data. We've done that. We know that that's a loss, but we decided that that was something we had to just live with. But we know that now people want to interact. And interestingly, they don't just respond to the questions that Jack and his colleagues came up with. They'll also tell us a lot of stuff about the museum. So we know what they like about the museum. We know that their favourite part of the museum, exhibit in the museum, is the glass jar of moles, who are now, as I think Jack said, the most digitally engaged, globally digitally engaged museum exhibits ever, we think. They have a thriving Twitter account and have become kind of global celebrities of the museum world on Twitter. So we know about the moles. We know that, you know, yes, this is a model, as Jack has said, that can be taken into different museums. We put this into the Museum of Brands. Claire very much masterminded another project with the Imperial War Museums, which was a slightly different technical solution, but very much the same principle behind this. We found there that there's slightly less, there's slightly more spam, slightly less trust, if you like, but it's a very much bigger museum. It's a very much a different environment to do these things in. But certainly, you know, this is clearly a model that works, and it's clearly a model that people are very excited by. As Jack was saying, the problem becomes sustainability, however, in the sense that this was, you know, an experiment. This was something that we didn't know whether it was going to work. We didn't know whether anybody would be interested. Nobody had ever done anything like this as far as we could tell, so we just kind of gave it a punt. And we put it on static iPads. Jack has got one with him that actually has Curator on it, in case anybody wants to look at it. The point is, they're iPads are not designed to be museum interactive platforms. They turn themselves off or fall over after about 8 hours, so the grants had to get used to sort of restarting them all the time. Then there's this question of, so where do we go from here? You know, is it sustained? Do we say, well, that's, you know, it's had its moment, we take it out, we do something different? Do we, you know, it's not so much the money, it's the person power. It was interesting to see this slide earlier on about problems with digital and museums and being sort of to do with expertise, to do with support, to do with IT infrastructure. And that's the question about sustaining it. It's not so much did we, you know, what we did to develop the technical stuff was have another PhD and CU student in CASA who developed the technical stuff and has been supporting it sort of in his spare time. But then there's the question of, well, if it's going to be sustained, how is that then ported onto the university's IT support infrastructure, such as it is? It's time and expertise that really are the key to sustainability, and the fact that it has to be upgraded every time iOS changes, which is not. You know, once this person has left, then there's a question of who does that. So I think there are questions about it in the long term that we simply didn't anticipate. As Jack said, we had no idea it was going to be so popular. We had no idea it was going to be such a success. We just thought of it as something that we would do in a museum to see whether it worked. It would be a useful case study for Claire's PhD. It was something sort of, let's run it up the flagpole, see whether anyone salutes it, and we'll learn a lot about the way people interact with digital resources in museums, which we have done. But so there's the question now of what next, and that's not one for me to answer at the moment. So I'm going to stop at this point. Thank you.
Okay. I think because I probably have the longest job title in this room, I'll have to explain a little bit first. I work at the University of Glasgow, but it's a new post which is jointly funded between the Hunterian and HATI, the Humanities Advanced Technology and Information Institute. It was very interesting listening about Curator. We will now go the other end completely, where we're just about, this was a completed project that brought up a lot of very interesting issues and fascinating questions. This is more about how do you start when you have digital resources and you're interested in addressing your users and opening up community engagement and also trying to understand how these are being used. So as you can see from the two hats, it's quite, because both of them are relevant to the project I'm going to talk about, with HATI having the long experience with research in digital heritage, but also a very successful museum studies course with a lot of very enthusiastic students wanting to deal with issues like that, but also expertise in digital curation, information management, and so on. And on the other side, the Hunterian with its collections and the very wide range of those was very nice test bed to do more research. I think a lot of different people today and yesterday touched about the changing world in university museums, but also beyond. And it certainly was the case at the University of Glasgow, where I returned recently, less than a year ago, that it had just finished a quite painful period of restructuring. The Hunterian itself was trying to reposition itself and realign again with the core of the university, try to follow the wider sort of pressures and drivers for UK higher education. And with all of that, I think good things come out of painful processes, at least sometimes, was a strong commitment to put the collections at the core of teaching and research and try to strengthen the links with all the colleges, as they're now called, what used to be the faculties at the University of Glasgow, but also making very clear that we need to open up outside the doors of the university, the way a lot of different collections are doing here. I don't have much time, and as all of you here in some capacity are dealing with fabulous collections, I won't say who's his biggest, nicer, or whatever. I don't think there's much point, but it's very diverse, ranging from sort of Macintosh furniture to world-renowned sort of numismatics, zoology. We do have our turtles as well, and sort of Captain Cook's sort of ethnological material. It's very diverse and quite wide-ranging. What's interesting, apart from my appointment as a sign of trying to be closer, strengthening the links with the College of Arts, was also the year before the appointment of the first Hunterian student engagement officer, and her work behind the scenes made a lot of difference that other museums, university museums in this country as well, are copying us after that, from what I'm hearing. Just simple ideas, but that so many of the university museums don't always have the time, the strategy, or for different reasons don't actually do in place. Engaging, for example, the undergraduates in doing guided tours, which is a win-win situation, but also having the Hunterian Associates program, which is more for our postgraduates, working with different parts of the collections, and as part of that, they deal with a lot of student engagement. Some of it is increasingly digital that relates to this project. Apart from the museum studies course that the Hunterian contributes to, there's also different forms of engagement with museums, galleries, Scotland, interns, and so on. The museum studies course, for example, has one module on cultural heritage informatics that specifically addresses the different uses of technologies within the cultural heritage sector and some of the issues and problems there. Apart from taking them to the attic to look at our zoology collection, they also had to think a lot about using some of the tools. For example, the app that Tandy mentioned in her keynote was part of their course. We went to Edinburgh and had to test case it as part of one of our site visits. We also have plans for expanding, going back and kind of broadening to more introductory courses, which we think are still very important, like museum and communication and learning through objects, It was interesting for me to see at the film yesterday that was shown at the very nice reception, stressing how important this learning from object is. I think all of you are very aware here, but it's striking for me to see time and time again how informal education, so little of it takes place, and we rely so much on sort of reading and maths, and a lot of people enter university without this kind of set of skills. So with all of this happening at the same place, we felt that the MSc at this stage and the Hunterian has the potential to be a centre of excellence, not just in Scotland, but beyond as well. We just moved the collections management system from an ingrown one to Economou, with its potential to do more digital storytelling and online exhibitions and create links. And also, apart from starting some transdisciplinary themes in the temporary exhibitions program, there's the launch of the Science Showcase, which is small, easy to set up displays with strong public program sort of element to showcase the science research taking place at the university and open up a different forum there. There's also plans for an MSc in museum education, but I think the key project that relates to the research we want to do, and I want to talk about impact today, is the Kelvin Hall development. You might have heard of it, but for those of you unfamiliar with Glasgow, Kelvin Hall is the historic building that used to house the Museum of Transport. Before it moved a few years ago to the Riverside, the new purpose-built building designed by Zaha Hadid that won European Museum of the Year award last year. So this empty space, which is vast, it's one of the largest sort of covered spaces in Scotland and probably beyond, that has a very strong, it's an important landmark for the city. The university managed to put its money where its rhetoric is. So they're together with HLF, they managed to get funding, but partnering with Glasgow Life, and mostly the Glasgow Museum's part of the Glasgow Life part, and the Scottish Screen Archive. So there's three partners, University of Glasgow, Glasgow Life, and the Scottish Screen Archive, are going to collocate part of their collections, in our case, all of our collections, in that building. So it's the 1/3 of the building that you see there at the top that we're actually at this stage have funding and going ahead with in the next couple of years. It's going to be more for collection storage and behind the scenes activity, which is very interesting. We're now exploring the possibility for a stage 2 application for exhibition galleries. But at this stage, this is more for a study center, a collections sort of center as well. And because for those of you who know a little bit about the Hunterian collections, at the moment they're dispersed in so many different venues within the campus and beyond, it's becoming very difficult, not just for the visitors, but for the staff as well. This is a unique opportunity for the town and gown to really work in practice. So we thought, being also this relationship with the museum studies, a strong research component of one of the sort of Russell Group universities, is to take this opportunity not just to organize this a bit better, but also to do some serious research about the impact and looking at different user groups. We are very much at the beginning. The project as well is only just starting, but we thought it's important to do different steps. It was very interesting the way the previous panel discussion, I thought it was very interesting. It hijacked a little bit the impact thing, but I think that's a good thing. It brought a lot of the different links. There's no single recipe, I think, about how to do things. Other people stress the importance of starting small and maybe growing later, or trying different models. In our case, we thought it's better to focus on the Hunterian collections as a test bed initially and as a case study, and use the lessons learned for the other partners in the project, because there's going to be a portal linking all the collections. But as we all know, if you put garbage in, it's garbage out from the portal or the database. So it's trying to look a little bit at online catalogs at this stage. It's a lot of interesting questions. The way with Curator, we're also thinking, how do you link this with social media, with wider engagement, a different kind of discussion. But our starting point is the standard, important but boring for a lot of people online catalog, and then expanding for different kind of digital resources. So we're also interested in the stage 3 is potentially also working with other people in similar situation, interesting and things like that. So I'm very happy to talk to any of you later on that's wondering about how to use their digital online material and how they're engaging with different audiences. I kept talking about the Hunterian, but I didn't mention the very important collections of the university, special collections, the library and the archives, which one could think of the restructuring at least under one umbrella, which makes working with them much more interesting. So I only need 1 more minute. So I've put some very simple questions there, but we thought again, starting maybe with the very basic and simple and try to look at the more complex ones. We want to know who is using the material now. I'm having some quite discouraging discussion with some of my colleagues at the museum. It's probably only the curators within the museum that bother to use the web interface anyway. That remains to be seen. That's the point, though. It was very interesting to listen to the welcome and some of the research we're doing. We're not at the moment really recording hardly anything about who is doing what, and I think that's the first important step, that there are different ways to go about it, but at least explore maybe the potential, and the different speakers here mentioned, for example, the liaising with computing science or talking to other people interested in this. But I think it's important to try it as well to move maybe a little bit beyond the kind of Google Analytics approach. Or even just that is already a step to try to see who is doing what with that material. Eventually, it's much more important for us of what's the kind of impact that this material has. I don't think I need to argue in this room about the time and resources that's required to create good quality digital resources and put them online. It's surprising for us that still after all this time, we don't know all that much about what's happening. For example, one of the increasing questions, it seems recently, okay, it used to be, if we build it, will they come? And talking about crowdsourcing, now it is, if we build it and put it up there, what will happen after they download? What do they do with it afterwards when they put it on social media, when they do all kinds of other stuff? And the they is defining that. Of course, for a university museum, it's, okay, the Glasgow University community, but definitely opening up to all the other different users beyond that. So to do all that, I think by definition, it's not possible to do it just with quantitative or qualitative, and I think it's very important to try to combine the two. Whether we like it or not, the ref might not be in 2020 in that name, in that form, but I think impact is here to stay for all of us, whether we're in university museums or beyond. So I think it's very important that we start building a body of knowledge and we talk more with each other, combining resources, about trying to find a little bit about how are these things being used and what do people get out of it. Thank you very much.